Salt built empires long before oil ever existed. For thousands of years, civilizations fought wars, built trade networks, controlled populations, and created fortunes over one simple mineral people now leave forgotten on restaurant tables. Because without salt, entire societies could collapse. Before refrigeration existed, salt was survival itself. It preserved meat through winters, protected food during long voyages, fed armies on military campaigns, and allowed cities to grow beyond local farming limits. A kingdom with salt could store food, expand trade, and survive famine. A kingdom without it became vulnerable, and that made salt one of the most valuable resources on Earth. In the ancient world, major trade routes stretched across deserts, mountains, and oceans, carrying massive shipments of salt between civilizations. Some roads became so important that entire cities grew rich simply by controlling who could transport salt through their territory. Empires taxed it heavily, kings protected it fiercely, and smugglers risked death trying to avoid paying for it. One of the most famous salt powers emerged in West Africa. Deep in the Sahara Desert, enormous caravans crossed deadly landscapes carrying giant slabs of salt mined from places like Tagaza. The mines were brutal. Workers cut huge blocks of white salt directly from the desert floor under extreme heat where almost nothing could survive. Yet the trade became unbelievably profitable. Camels carried salt south toward wealthy kingdoms like Mali, where the mineral was exchanged for gold. In some regions, salt became so valuable that it was traded ounce for ounce against precious metals. Gold may have created wealth, but salt preserved life. The caravans themselves looked almost unreal. Thousands of camels stretched across endless dunes carrying heavy salt blocks through some of the harshest environments on Earth. Sandstorms buried travelers alive. Wells dried up. Entire caravans disappeared into the desert forever. Still, the trade never stopped, because the profits were enormous. Meanwhile, across Europe and Asia, rulers discovered something dangerous about salt. People could not live without it. That meant governments controlling salt could control populations directly. In ancient China, dynasties established powerful state monopolies over salt production. Officials tightly regulated mines, transport routes, and sales. Salt taxes generated massive government revenue for centuries and helped fund armies, infrastructure, and imperial expansion. The system became one of the earliest examples of a government controlling an essential industry at a national scale. And it worked extremely well. So well, in fact, that many other empires copied the idea. Throughout medieval Europe, salt taxes became deeply unpopular, but incredibly profitable. Entire economies depended on them. Some rulers taxed salt so aggressively that ordinary people struggled to preserve food affordably. In France, the infamous salt tax known as the gabelle became one of the most hated laws in the country. People smuggled illegal salt across borders to avoid paying government prices. Armed guards patrolled trade routes, searching wagons and villages for contraband supplies. Thousands were arrested over salt crimes alone. Something as ordinary as seasoning food had become political and dangerous. But salt shaped more than economics and politics. It transformed cities themselves. Some of the wealthiest urban centers in Europe grew rich controlling salt trade routes. Venice expanded its influence partially through salt commerce across the Mediterranean. Salzburg, literally meaning salt fortress, became prosperous because nearby mines produced enormous quantities of the mineral. Entire architectural wonders were funded by salt money. Underground mines became astonishing engineering projects. Deep tunnels stretched beneath mountains where workers carved gigantic chambers directly into salt deposits. Some mines operated for centuries, creating underground worlds lit only by torchlight. The work was brutal. Miners spent long hours underground breathing dust and hauling massive loads through dangerous tunnels prone to collapse and flooding. But demand remained constant because nearly every person on Earth needed salt daily to survive. Then came another transformation. As global exploration expanded, salt became essential for naval empires. Ships crossing oceans required enormous quantities of preserved food. Salted meat fed sailors during voyages lasting months or even years. Without salt preservation, long-distance exploration and colonial expansion would have been nearly impossible. In many ways, salt quietly powered the age of exploration itself. Empires crossed oceans because food could survive the journey, and that meant salt helped fuel colonialism, global trade networks, and international warfare on an enormous scale. But over time, technology began changing everything. Industrial refrigeration slowly reduced dependence on traditional preservation methods. Railroads and modern transportation improved food distribution. New industrial systems made salt cheaper and easier to mass produce. Its strategic value declined. The resource that once controlled empires slowly became ordinary. Today, salt feels almost invisible. People buy it for almost nothing. Restaurants leave it freely on tables. Entire civilizations once fought over a mineral most people barely think about anymore. But for most of human history, salt was never ordinary. It determined military power, it controlled trade, it built cities, it funded kingdoms, and it shaped global history far more than most people realize. There was a time when governments rose and fell over access to white crystals pulled from deserts, oceans, and mountains. A time when caravans crossed deadly wastelands carrying cargo worth fortunes. A time when one of humanity's greatest sources of wealth was something people now casually spill onto dinner plates without even noticing. Because before oil, before electricity, before modern industry, salt was power.